In the culture in which we live today, and in the environment of social media, which has influenced our thinking in one way or another, the word friend has taken on a whole new meaning. A friend has become a contact in a list of contacts where they or we can be anyone that we choose to be with just a few well-chosen and many times superficial words. So, if that does not define what a friend really is, question is, how do we define a friend? What is a friend? Well, a true friend is a person who we know well, who knows us well, and yet, despite our shortcomings, cares about us anyway. There is a mutual love, mutual respect, mutual affection between friends. A true friend doesn't abandon us when things become difficult or when we become difficult to deal with. We can trust that a true friend will be there for us just as we are there for him or for her. And in the Bible, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, we are told that the hearts of true friends are knit together in love and in faithfulness for one another. But in addition to that, in John chapter 15, we are told that a true friend is willing to lay down his life for his friend. Well, that probably narrows the list of friends that we have, doesn't it? But even beyond that, in Matthew 11:19, we are told that Jesus is a friend of sinners. He laid down his life for sinners, for those of us who did not know him or care about him, for those who were not his friends, but who were, in fact, his enemies. So now, even if everyone is against us, even if everyone abandons us, even if everyone unfriends us, he remains true. He remains our friend. He has told us he will never leave us or forsake us. And as we come to John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, that is the comfort. That is the assurance that we find here. Jesus is a friend of sinners, a true friend, a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We can count on him. We can always count on him. And so we're told in verse 1 of John chapter 8, when the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles was over, after the leaders from the nation of Israel had been unsuccessful in their attempt to arrest Jesus and to stop him from speaking to the people, they all went to their homes that night. Perhaps they were thinking about what they would do to try to silence Jesus. But that night, it says, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. just outside of the city of Jerusalem, about a half mile from the temple. Think about it. The creator of the universe, creator of all things, had no place of his own to stay that night. Even in a world that he had created. As he said in that familiar verse in Matthew chapter 8, the foxes have burrows, and even the birds of the air have their nests. But, he said, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head except on that hillside, under some olive trees, just outside of the city of Jerusalem. And then, early in the morning, orthos, at daybreak, as the sun was rising, Jesus went down that mountain slope and he crossed the Kidron Valley. And once again, he came into the outer court of the temple. And because of the power of his words, all of the people were coming to him. They were coming to hear what he had to say. Well, some of them came out of a genuine interest to know more about him. Of course, there were some who came just to find fault with him. And so it says in verse 2, he sat down, as was the custom for teachers in that culture, and he began to teach them the word of God with simplicity and with purity, with accuracy and with divine power. But then, all of a sudden, his teaching was interrupted. There was a disturbance somewhere in the courtyard, a disturbance as the scribes, the lawyers, the interpreters of Jewish law, and the Pharisees, an influential and a respected group of leaders from the nation of Israel, forced their way through the crowd. And we are told they brought with them a woman, ago in Greek. They dragged her along by force. And they set her before Jesus. A woman, we are told, who had been caught, katalambano, who had been seized while she was involved in adultery. A violation of the commandments of God. A serious crime, to be sure. And though they had courts to try these cases, instead of following judicial procedure, instead of due process of the law, they brought her to Jesus. But something isn't right here, is it? Someone is missing. Leviticus chapter 10, we are told that the law demanded that both the man and the woman who were guilty of that crime were both to be held accountable before the law. But the man is nowhere to be found. Only the woman was arrested. And having set her in the midst of the people, in the temple courtyard, while she was standing there in her shame, being publicly humiliated, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, Rabbi, this woman has been caught in adultery, in the very act, so there is no doubt of her guilt." But there's more to this. because they are attempting to use that woman, to use her to trap Jesus, to discredit him before the crowd of people. So we're told in verse 5, they said to him, in the law, in the Jewish law, Moses commanded us to stone such women to death who were guilty of this crime. Of course, they neglected the other part of that law, which said that such men were also to be stoned to death as well. They were looking for the law of God to be fulfilled. And so they asked Jesus, verse 5, so what do you say? They thought they had trapped Jesus. Jesus had claimed to be a friend of sinners, hadn't he? How could he be a friend of sinners and be a friend of God? How could he harmonize the justice of God, the justice that a holy and righteous God demands, with the mercy, with the loving kindness of God? It's a good question. It's a question that many people today still ask. But you know, those religious leaders were not really interested in justice. They weren't interested in mercy, and they certainly weren't interested in that woman, because it says in verse 6, they were saying these things to test Jesus, perazzo in Greek, to entice him, to say something that they could use to destroy him. They were setting a trap for him, and they were setting a trap that they thought he would be unable to free himself from. It was a dilemma. And they did this, we're told, in order that they might have the grounds, a reason for accusing him. Kategoreo, to catch him, to trip him up. But Jesus didn't take the bait, did he? Instead, we're told, he stooped down, kupto in Greek. Well, you recall he was already sitting. So what he did was he leaned forward and he bowed his head, ignoring them for the moment, ignoring their attempt to maliciously manipulate the situation for themselves. And instead, we're told, with his finger, he wrote on the ground in the dust of the earth. And what did he write? Well, many people have suggested many things, but the fact is we are not told what he wrote. So any suggestions are just speculation. Perhaps he was just grieved over the hardness of their hearts. But the delay by Jesus in giving them an answer may have led them to believe that perhaps Jesus didn't have an answer at all to their question. Perhaps they thought they had finally outmaneuvered him, that they had finally won. But we're told when they persisted, epimeno, when they continued to relentlessly ask him over and over again, insisting on an answer, Jesus straightened up, it says, anakupto. He lifted himself up and he looked at them and he made this unexpected and profound statement in verse 7, where he said to them, he who is without sin among you, ana martetos in Greek, an unusual word. He who is blameless, he who has never sinned at all, he who does not even have the capacity to sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her and become her executioner. Jesus did not deny the guilt of that woman. She was guilty of a sin, of a crime against God. But at the same time, Jesus exposed the guilt of her accusers. They were unfit to be her judges. They were unfit to be her executioners. They condemned her wickedness, while at the same time they basked in the glory of their self-righteousness. So they were guilty, weren't they? They were guilty of hypocrisy. As the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 2, you are without excuse, every one of you who passes judgment. For in the way that you condemn another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice the very same things, so you declare yourself to be worthy of punishment. Examine your heart. Examine your life before you are so quick to trash everyone else, because God alone is qualified to judge correctly, and he is coming, Paul tells us, to judge the people of this earth. And how can you escape the judgment of God? Don't you know that the kindness of God that he shows towards us in holding back his judgment, his patience towards us, is designed for this reason? It is designed to encourage us to turn from our sin and to turn to Christ and to be saved. But the reality is that in your stubbornness and in your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath. You are accumulating many reasons for God to bring down his anger upon you in the day of his righteous judgment, when all things will be revealed. These are words for us today. What should we do? We need to run to the cross. It is only there we'll find safety. It is only there we will find forgiveness. Forgiveness for our sin. And so again, it says in verse 8, Jesus stooped down. He leaned forward, and once again he wrote on the ground, in the dust of the earth, waiting for these things to sink into the minds of these men. And when they heard these things, when the accusers of this woman contemplated what Jesus had said, we are told in verse 9, they began to go out of the courtyard, one by one, beginning with the older ones first, because they were the first to realize the extent of their own sin, having had a lifetime to accumulate those sins. Those who had come to discredit Jesus and to humiliate him left in humiliation and in shame. And so we are told Jesus was left alone. The crowd of people around him, that illegal trial was over. But the sin of that woman remained, didn't it? She was still guilty. Her sin must be paid for. It needed to be dealt with. And who was there to deal with that? Well, the only one who was qualified to throw the first stone at her was Jesus himself, because only he is the one who has no sin. And the woman was left there where she had been standing in the midst of the courtyard. And straightening up, lifting himself up, we are told, Jesus said to her in verse 10, "Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?" Look at her answer in verse 11. She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you." What is he saying to her? What is he saying? Because he's speaking to us as well. He is saying, I forgive you the way that he has forgiven us. He is saying, I take your sin, your adultery, upon myself the way that he took our sin upon himself. So now he says, go your way. Live your life in the reality of my forgiveness. And from now on, from this day forward, abandon your lifestyle of sin. Leave it behind. And do not sin. Hamartano. Do not wander off the path of righteousness anymore. But seek to honor God by your life. These are words not only for that woman. These are words for us today. Come to Jesus for forgiveness, for the forgiveness of your sin. But then seek to live for him. Our shame is gone. Our shame was placed upon Jesus on that cross. We have been forgiven by his sacrifice for us. The truth is, we have been lifted up from the dust of death. Glory to his name forever. Amen.
You've been listening to Bruce David Bell, pastor of Berean Bible Fellowship. If the Lord has ministered to you through this message and you would like more information, then visit us on the web at bbfva.org.